I remember the first time I heard the floorboards whisper. It was subtle, like wind slipping through cracks, but deeper. Almost like a murmur. At first, I thought it was the old pipes or the house settling. But the sound didn't echo like creaking wood. It spoke. Beneath my feet, something was alive. But let me start from the beginning. Ethan and I had just moved into the house 3 days earlier. It was a grand old Victorian nestled at the edge of a quiet town called Alder Hollow. We inherited it from Ethan's uncle, a man I never met and Ethan barely remembered, some black sheep relative who died alone. His obituary so vague it raised more questions than it answered. The house stood like a monument from another century, with its steep gables, arched windows, and twisted iron gate. Ivy clung to the walls like veins, and a gray fog seemed to linger on the lawn even in sunlight. I should have felt lucky. The place was massive. High ceilings, antique woodwork, stained glass windows that turned morning light into strange colors across the walls. But from the first step inside, something felt wrong. The air was too still, like the house was holding its breath. Ethan, on the other hand, was excited. I remember how he stood in the foyer, arms stretched wide, spinning in place like a kid in a toy store. "Can you believe this, James?" he laughed. "It's all ours." He was smiling, but there was something tired in his eyes. He hadn't been sleeping well, he said. Nightmares, though he never told me what about. We spent the first day unpacking, moving boxes into rooms we hadn't even explored yet. The house had 4 bedrooms, 2 parlors, a library that still smelled of leather and old smoke, and a basement sealed with a heavy wooden door. Ethan avoided the basement completely. He said it gave him a headache just thinking about it. The second night, I heard the whispering. It was just past midnight. Ethan was asleep, snoring softly beside me. The room was cold, despite the fire I had started earlier. I sat up, pulling the blanket around my shoulders. That's when I heard it. A soft, low rustling, then a voice. Not clear, not loud. Just a breath of sound, like a sigh tangled in syllables. I leaned over and pressed my ear to the wooden floorboards. My heart pounded. There it was again. A voice. Or maybe several. Faint. Repeating something I couldn't understand. Like chanting, but in a language that made my stomach twist. I pulled away fast, heart racing. I told myself I was imagining things. Maybe a draft. Maybe my own breath rebounding from the floor. I didn't want to wake Ethan. I didn't want to sound crazy. But I didn't sleep after that. In the morning, I asked Ethan if he heard anything strange last night. He just shook his head and shrugged it off. "It's an old house, James," he said. "They make noises." Right. Noises. Later that afternoon, while Ethan went into town to pick up supplies, I found the first symbol. It was carved into the underside of the staircase, half hidden behind the old coats hanging in the entryway closet. I wasn't even looking for it. I had dropped my keys, and when I bent down to retrieve them, there it was. A shape, etched deep into the wood. Circular, with jagged lines cutting through it like broken spokes. I ran my fingers over it. It was too clean, too recent. And it wasn't the only one. Over the next hour, I found 4 more. One on the side of the pantry door. One behind a loose brick in the fireplace. Another carved under the kitchen table, and the last, etched into the wall above the sealed basement door. It wasn't until then that I realized something I hadn't thought of before. We never received a key to that basement. We had a whole house to explore, but one part was locked away. Intentionally. That night, as I stood in front of the basement door, staring at the symbol above it, I whispered something to myself I didn't understand. 3 syllables. They just came out, slipped from my mouth like water from a crack in the earth. Ethan appeared behind me suddenly, startling me. "You okay?" he asked. I turned to face him, and for a moment, just a flicker, I swear his eyes looked darker. Not just tired, sunken. Like something was pulling him inward. "I'm fine," I lied. He smiled faintly, but didn't ask anything else. We didn't speak of the basement. Not that night. Not the next. But I kept hearing the whispers. And deep down, I knew something wasn't right. Not with the house. Not with Ethan. And definitely not with whatever was buried beneath our feet. The first night in our new home was quiet. Too quiet. You'd expect the creaks of old wood, maybe the wind brushing against the glass like fingers. But no. It was as if the house was holding its breath, waiting. Even Ethan, who usually tosses in his sleep, lay still beside me, breathing slowly, almost too slowly, like he was mimicking someone else's rhythm. I couldn't sleep. It wasn't just the strangeness of a new place. I felt something under the floorboards. Not movement, not exactly. More like a presence. A pressure. as if the earth below the house wasn't just dirt and roots, but something that listened. Around 3 in the morning, I finally drifted off. But not for long. A faint scratching woke me. Sharp. Slow. Like fingernails on old stone. I sat up in bed, holding my breath. The noise came from beneath us, somewhere near the basement. "Did you hear that?" I whispered. Ethan didn't answer. He didn't move. "Ethan?" I nudged him. Still nothing. But his eyes were open. I froze. His pupils were wide, almost swallowing the color of his irises. He was looking at the ceiling, lips slightly parted, as if waiting for something. A moment later, he blinked, turned his head slowly toward me, and smiled. "Bad dream?" he asked, voice rough and groggy. I lied and said yes. The next morning, sunlight filtered in through yellowed curtains, warming the dusty floors and making the old wallpaper peel look even sadder. Ethan acted normal, like nothing had happened. He laughed as he made coffee, humming some song I didn't recognize. When I asked if he remembered waking up last night, his brow furrowed. "No. Slept like a rock." "You okay?" I forced a smile. "Yeah. Just adjusting, I guess." After breakfast, I went down into the basement. I told Ethan I was going to unpack some boxes, but the truth was I needed to see it. The source of that sound. The basement door groaned as I opened it. The stairs were narrow and steep. Each step let out a dry moan beneath my feet. The air grew colder as I descended, thick with a scent I couldn't place, old soil, rust, and something sweeter. Something wrong. Down there, the light switch flickered, then died. I stood still, my hand still on the chain that controlled the bulb. My eyes adjusted to the dim light coming from the tiny basement window. Dust floated in the air, swirling like ash. At first glance, the basement was empty, just cracked concrete walls, a few forgotten boxes, an old table covered with a white sheet. But when I moved deeper into the shadows, my foot landed on something uneven. I crouched down. There, near the center of the floor, a small patch of the concrete had caved in slightly. Just enough to reveal dirt beneath. Fresh, loose dirt. I touched it. Cold. Damp. And something about it felt breathing. Suddenly, the scratching returned. It came from directly below me. I stood and stepped back. The sound stopped. I looked up at the ceiling, toward the floor of the kitchen above. Then down again. Silence. But the silence felt heavier now, like it was aware of me. That's when I saw it. On the far wall, just above the baseboard, something had been carved into the concrete. Not etched with a tool. Scratched. Like with fingernails. Symbols I didn't recognize. Sharp looping. Too precise for someone just fooling around. I reached out and ran my fingers over the marks. They felt deeper than they looked, like the wall had been softened when they were made. Like the concrete wanted to be marked. Behind me, the basement door slammed shut. I jumped, heart hammering in my chest. I rushed up the stairs and tried the knob. Locked. I pounded on the door. "Ethan!" I shouted. "Hey! I'm stuck!" No answer. I waited. 10 minutes passed. Then 15. Then I heard footsteps, slow, deliberate, approaching the door. The lock clicked. Ethan stood there, holding a glass of water, his face calm. "What were you doing down there?" he asked. I stared at him, shaken. "You locked me in." He tilted his head. "No, I didn't. I was in the backyard, getting some air. Maybe the door just shut too hard." I wanted to argue. I wanted to accuse him. But something in his eyes made me stop. They weren't cruel. Just distant. As if someone else was watching me from behind them. That night, I didn't sleep at all. I lay awake listening to the silence under the house. And somewhere deep beneath the floorboards, I swear I heard it again. A whisper. But this time it knew my name. The morning sun filtered through the stained glass windows, painting strange colors across our kitchen floor. Ethan sat at the table, sipping his black coffee like everything was normal. But something in the air felt stretched. Thin. Like the walls were holding their breath. I didn't tell him what I saw last night. I wasn't ready. Not yet. Instead, I lied. Told him I'd take a walk into town to grab a few things. He nodded absently and kept flipping through that old, dust-covered book he'd found in the attic last week. He said it was just some boring journal from the 1800s. I didn't believe him anymore. Alder Hollow looked like any quiet town on the outside. Gray skies, crooked telephone poles, and streets that rarely saw more than 3 cars in an hour. But the people here, they watched. Not in a curious way, but in that silent, heavy way you feel in your spine. Like they already knew what you were about to say. Like they'd heard it all before. I stopped at the small general store to pick up some aspirin and to clear my head. As I stepped out, a voice stopped me. "You're James, aren't you?" I turned. A man stood leaning against a lamppost, tall and lean with neatly combed dark hair and eyes that didn't blink enough. He wore a beige overcoat, even though it was far too warm for one. "Yes," I said cautiously. He smiled. "I thought so. I'm Leo, collector of strange things. And this town is full of them." There was something about him that made me feel like I was standing too close to a fire, warm but dangerous. "I'm sorry, have we met before?" "No, but I've heard of the house you're living in. The Mercer house. Strange place. People don't stay there long." I tried to play it off. "It's just old. Has character." Leo chuckled. "That's one word for it." He stepped closer, pulling a small, worn book from his coat pocket. "You might find this interesting." He handed it to me. The cover was cracked leather, and the pages inside were filled with symbols, curved lines, jagged shapes, all inked in dark red. "What is this?" I asked. "The hollow tongue," he said, his voice softer now. "An ancient language. Older than this town. Older than memory." I flipped through it, feeling a cold wave pass over my fingers. "Where did you get this?" "Let's just say, it belongs to that house of yours. Thought you should have it." I wanted to hand it back, to walk away and forget this entire encounter. But I didn't. I tucked it under my arm. Leo's expression shifted just slightly, something like satisfaction or maybe relief. "Just be careful. The more you understand it, the more it understands you." Before I could respond, he turned and walked down the street. He didn't look back. That night, after Ethan went to bed, I sat alone in the living room with the book spread open on the coffee table. The symbols danced before my eyes like they were alive, shifting when I wasn't looking directly at them. One of the pages was dog-eared. I turned to it. There was a crude drawing of something buried beneath a house, our house. A dark mass with dozens of arms, no eyes, just mouths. Underneath it were 5 words in English, scrawled in thin, shaky letters. "It speaks through the cracks." I didn't sleep that night. I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, listening to the faint sounds beneath the floorboards. Not mice. Not pipes. Something speaking, in a language I was beginning to understand. I couldn't sleep that night. Ethan had gone out again, just after midnight. No explanation. No goodbye. He slipped out the back door like a shadow. I waited 10 minutes before I followed. The air outside was damp and cold, the kind of cold that sinks into your bones and makes the trees look like they're holding secrets. The moon hung low, half hidden behind clouds, casting strange, broken light over the backyard. I moved quietly, stepping over roots and avoiding the gravel path so it wouldn't crunch under my boots. Ethan was ahead, but just barely. I caught glimpses of him between the trees, his back straight, shoulders tense. He was moving fast, as if drawn toward something, like something was calling him. He didn't once look back. I followed him through the woods for nearly 15 minutes. My breath came in slow clouds. The silence around me felt unnatural. Not even an owl. Not even wind. Just the soft thud of my heartbeat and the rustle of dead leaves under my feet. Then I saw the light. Flickering orange. Firelight. It bled through the trees ahead like something alive. As I got closer, I could hear it, low murmuring. Dozens of voices chanting in rhythm. The sound didn't sound human at all. Like they were trying to sing but had forgotten how. I dropped to the ground and crawled the last few feet to a low ridge that looked down into a hollow. And what I saw chilled me more than anything I'd ever seen. They were all wearing masks, hand-carved, jagged, and strange. Animal shapes twisted into something wrong. Antlers, tusks, mouths with too many teeth. Robes dragged across the forest floor, stained with something dark. The group stood in a circle around a pit carved into the earth. And in the middle of it all was Ethan. He wasn't wearing a mask. His face was pale, lit by the fire. Eyes closed. Arms lifted high. He looked calm. Too calm. Like this was normal. Like this was right. He began to speak. But it wasn't English. It was that same language I'd seen in the attic, those symbols. Only now it had sound. And the sound was wrong. It twisted in my ears, deep and cold, like something crawling under my skin. It made my teeth ache. The ground trembled slightly. Just once. Enough to send a few pebbles sliding down the hill beside me. No one seemed to notice. Then came the offering. One of the masked followers stepped forward and laid something at Ethan's feet. I couldn't see it clearly. It looked like a bundle, fur and bone. Maybe an animal. Maybe not. The chanting grew louder, wild now, unhinged. The fire roared up high into the trees like it had been fed something alive. Sparks danced into the night sky like fireflies. And I swear the ground around the pit cracked. Only a little. But it was there, thin, web-like lines spreading outward. Something underneath moved. I felt it. A presence. Heavy. Ancient. Watching. I stumbled back too fast, stepping on a branch. It snapped loudly. The chanting stopped. I held my breath. Silence. For a long moment, nothing moved. Then Ethan turned his head. Slowly. Like he knew exactly where I was. His eyes met mine. And they weren't his eyes. They were black. No whites. No light. Just two deep, endless holes staring through me. I ran. Branches whipped at my face. The chanting behind me had started again, but now it was faster. Frantic. The fire behind me rose again, and I didn't look back. I didn't stop running until I crashed through our back door, slamming it behind me and locking it twice. My hands were shaking. My lungs burned. Ethan didn't come back that night, but the firelight from the woods never went out. And I knew whatever was buried beneath our house. They were trying to wake it, and Ethan was helping them. I couldn't sleep. The whispers had changed. What began as faint murmurs scratching at the edges of my hearing had grown into something more deliberate. At night, lying beside Ethan in that cold room with peeling wallpaper and rotting wood beneath the carpet, I heard words. Not in English. Not in any language I knew. But they meant something. The way a scream means fear. The way thunder means danger. These sounds, they were trying to tell me something. I kept waking up at odd hours, drenched in sweat, heart racing like I'd just run for my life. Every time, I would turn to look at Ethan. He was still. Too still. One night, I found him standing in the corner of the bedroom, whispering back. Whispering in that same unholy tongue. I called his name. He didn't answer. His eyes were open but empty, like glass bulbs staring into nothing. I reached out to touch him, and he snapped out of it with a jolt, eyes wide and confused. "Were you sleepwalking?" I asked, trying to sound calm. He nodded slowly. "Yeah. Weird dream, I guess." He lied. I could feel it in his voice, like a note out of tune. The next morning, I returned to the attic. There was something up there that kept calling me back, the bundle of yellowed pages I had found days before. They were old, cracked at the edges, written in sharp lines and looping curves. I couldn't read a word. Not then. But when I stared at them long enough, something inside me moved, like the memory of a memory. I sat by the attic window with the pages spread around me, sunlight cutting through the dusty air. I started comparing symbols, scribbling notes, making guesses. My hands moved without thinking. Hours passed. By dusk, I had translated a phrase. It sleeps beneath the roots, where time forgets and earth remembers. That night, I dreamed of something massive, buried under our house. Not a body. Not even a being. It was a presence like gravity with a voice. It spoke in vibrations that cracked my teeth inside the dream. I woke up with blood on my pillow. A back molar had shattered. I told Ethan. He stared at me in silence. Then he smiled. "Maybe you should stop reading those things," he said. His smile didn't reach his eyes. Later, I found more carvings in the basement, not on the walls, but in the foundation. Symbols matching the pages. How long had they been there? Long before us? Before the house. My breath fogged in the air, though the furnace was running. A strange, steady humming filled the space, like a heartbeat deep underground. I stood there, hand pressed to the stone wall. I could feel warmth coming through. Not from the furnace. From below. I whispered one of the translated lines aloud. Just one. The hum stopped. The basement fell completely silent, as if the house itself was holding its breath. And then a soft knock. Not at the door. Not upstairs. From beneath the floor. 3 knocks. I ran. I locked the basement door and slid a heavy dresser in front of it. When Ethan came home, I told him there was a gas leak down there. He nodded too quickly. He didn't ask a single question. That night, I sat alone in the kitchen, the pages spread before me once more. The words were coming easier now, as if I had known them all along, just forgotten. I translated another line. The voice must feed. Not on blood, but on memory. On belief. And I knew then, this thing beneath us, it didn't want worship. It wanted something deeper. It wanted us. The sound woke me up again. It was faint at first, like the dragging of feet across wooden floors. At first, I thought it was just the house settling, or maybe a raccoon in the walls. But as I lay there, frozen under the sheets, I realized it wasn't just any sound. It was rhythmic. Purposeful. I turned to Ethan's side of the bed. Empty. The sheets were still warm. He'd left only minutes ago. I crept out of bed and listened again. The sound was coming from the basement. That same basement he told me to stay out of. The one he always kept locked now. For a second, I just stood in the hallway barefoot, trying to gather the courage to move. The air felt heavier than usual, almost wet, and there was a faint, coppery smell in the air, metallic like blood or rust. I made my way down the stairs slowly, each step creaking louder than I wanted it to. When I reached the basement door, it was open. Just a sliver, but enough to see a flickering orange light coming from below. I whispered, "Ethan?" No answer. I stepped down carefully, one foot after the other. The wooden steps groaned beneath me. The deeper I went, the stronger the smell became. I could feel it in my throat. Then I saw him. Ethan was kneeling on the floor in front of that stone slab. Shirtless. Dirt clung to his skin like he had been digging. His back was covered in scratches, some shallow, others deep enough to scab. His hands were pressed against the cold stone, and he was muttering something under his breath. I stayed hidden behind the last few steps, not making a sound. His voice, it didn't sound like him. It was too low, too steady, like someone else was speaking through him. I leaned forward, trying to hear the words. That was when the candlelight caught his face. His eyes were closed, but they moved rapidly beneath the lids, like he was dreaming while awake. His mouth moved without stopping, whispering that strange language I'd seen in the attic scrolls. Then his eyes opened. Not fully, just barely, but enough. They were pitch black. No whites. No color. Just darkness. I gasped. It was too loud. Ethan's head snapped toward me. I ducked, heart pounding so hard I could hear it in my ears. I waited for him to say something, anything, to ask what I was doing there. But he didn't speak. Instead, I heard the sound of him standing. I couldn't help myself. I looked again. Ethan was standing now, facing the stone slab. He raised his arms slowly, like he was offering something. And then he began to hum. It wasn't a melody. It was more like a vibration, a low, buzzing sound that made my skin crawl. The stone beneath him pulsed with light, just once, like a heartbeat. That was enough. I couldn't watch anymore. I backed up the stairs, careful not to make a sound. When I reached the top, I pushed the door shut and locked it. Back in our bedroom, I sat on the edge of the bed, shaking. What was he doing down there? Why were his eyes like that? And what was that thing buried beneath our house? I didn't sleep the rest of the night. By morning, Ethan was back in bed. He was snoring lightly, his back turned to me like nothing had happened. But when I reached under the covers, his feet were still caked with dirt. And later, when I peeked into the basement, the stone slab was clean again. No candles. No dirt. Nothing. Almost like it had all been a dream. But I know what I saw. And worse, I know that whatever I saw in Ethan's eyes last night, it wasn't him. Not anymore. I didn't sleep that night. Not because of the cold creeping in through the cracks of the house, or the sounds I had grown used to, scratching beneath the floorboards, moaning pipes that sometimes sounded like sighs. No, I didn't sleep because I had seen Ethan's eyes in the candlelight at the woods. And I couldn't forget them. They weren't human anymore. They glowed faintly. Not bright like flashlights, but dull, like two dying embers that refused to go out. And when he looked at me, it wasn't love or fear or even confusion I saw. It was absence. He was hollow. I sat on the edge of the bed while he slept, fully clothed, barely breathing. His chest rose and fell, but not the way a normal person breathes. It was slow, controlled, as if something else was keeping rhythm for him. At dawn, I left the house. I didn't care if he noticed. I found Leo sitting outside the town's old library, the one with the locked iron gate and the faded gargoyle heads on each corner of the roof. He was waiting for me. I could tell by the way he didn't flinch when I approached, like he had already seen this moment play out. "I need answers," I said, my voice sharper than I expected. He didn't look at me, just smiled at the rising sun like it was an old friend. "Answers are heavy, James," he said, "especially when the truth is older than your bones." I grabbed his coat. "What is happening to Ethan?" Leo turned to face me then, and for the first time, I saw the crack in his face. Not a wrinkle. A crack. A thin, dark line running from the edge of his mouth to just under his ear, like something underneath his skin was trying to come out. "You still think this is about Ethan?" he asked. Poor soul. He only stood close to the fire. "But you were born to burn." I stepped back. "No," I whispered. "You're wrong. He's the one who changed. He's the one who joined the cult. Not me." Leo stood slowly, brushing invisible dust from his coat. His eyes were too calm. like nothing surprised him anymore. Ethan was a vessel, he said, but not the right one. The God beneath your house, what you call it, knows the true key. You. I shook my head. That doesn't make any sense. I didn't even know. But it knew you, Leo said softly. You carry the guilt. You hear its voice. You've already started translating the hollow tongue, haven't you? Even when the symbols twist and move, even when they bleed, you keep reading. He was right. I hated it. But he was right. The papers from the attic, the ones filled with curling, claw-like letters, I had been drawn to them. Every night. Like they were calling me by name. I never understood the words, but the rhythm felt familiar. Comforting. Wrong, but still mine. What does it want from me? I asked, my voice shaking. Leo smiled again, wider this time. His cracked cheek twitched. It doesn't want worship. It wants memory. Identity. It wants to be remembered the way it remembers you. He leaned in closer. And it remembers everything. I left him there, beneath the watchful gargoyles. I didn't go home. Not right away. I walked aimlessly through Alder Hollow, but every alley, every street, felt like it turned back toward the house. Like the whole town was a maze, and the house was the center. When I finally returned, the air inside had changed. It was heavier. The silence wasn't empty, it was full. Listening. Ethan was still upstairs, still asleep. But I knew he wasn't dreaming. He was waiting. I went to the basement. Not because I wanted to. Because something inside me already knew it was time. The steps creaked under my weight. The lantern in my hand flickered, as if afraid to shine too far. When I reached the bottom, I saw it. The hole he had dug had grown wider. Deeper. The earth breathed warm air onto my face. And in the dirt, in the center of that darkness, was a shape. No, not a shape, a doorway. A stone slab etched with symbols I now understood. One word. James. Not in English. Not even in a human tongue. But I felt it. It had waited for me. I stood there, staring down at it, and something deep in my chest began to ache, not with fear but with hunger. Like I had been looking for this all my life, and never knew it. I was the key. I didn't know what that meant. But I knew one thing. The door wasn't going to stay closed for much longer. And when it opened, I wasn't sure who would walk through it. Me, or something else. I stopped sleeping. At first, it was just a few restless nights, my mind buzzing from everything I'd seen. But now, the hours passed in a haze of candlelight and scribbled ink. I barely left the attic. The pages I found weeks ago had taken over my life. The language, jagged, looping symbols inked in something darker than ink, seemed alive. Every time I stared at them, they shifted just slightly, as if breathing on the page. I didn't tell Ethan. He was hardly home anymore. Or maybe he was, and I just didn't notice. The house was too big and too quiet. Sometimes I heard him downstairs, speaking low, almost humming. But whenever I followed the sound, the rooms were empty. I was losing time. One night, I woke up on the attic floor covered in soot. The candles had burned down to nubs. My mouth was dry and sore, like I'd been chanting in my sleep. I checked my notebook, dozens of new symbols scrawled across the pages. My own handwriting. But I had no memory of writing any of it. That's when I started to understand. This wasn't just a language. It was a key. Each word carried weight, like a door creaking open in my mind. Some words I could feel, sharp and electric, crawling beneath my skin. Others came like whispers, so soft I wasn't sure they were mine. And then came the dreams. They weren't just dreams. They were memories I never lived. I stood in blackened fields, watching a sky drip with ash. I walked among hooded figures, chanting in a voice that wasn't mine. I saw a vast shape buried in stone, its form twisted and writhing, faceless but pulsing with hunger. I woke up gasping, clawing at my chest, certain something was trying to crawl out of me. I stopped using the mirror. It had started subtly. My reflection didn't blink when I did. Or it lingered just a second longer after I turned away. One night, I caught it smiling. Not a gentle smile, a knowing one, crooked and cold. It mouthed something I didn't understand, and I ran. I didn't tell anyone. Who could I tell? A small part of me, some buried, trembling voice, kept whispering that I was losing my mind. That this house, this town, this cult, was sinking its claws into me. But another part, a growing one, said this was clarity. That I wasn't being consumed. I was being revealed. The past began to blur. I'd look at pictures of Ethan and me from a year ago, and it felt like watching strangers. I couldn't even recall the sound of my mother's voice, or what my old apartment smelled like. All the edges of who I used to be were being sanded down, word by word, whisper by whisper. and I knew deep down that this was the point. The entity, the thing they called the buried voice, didn't want worship. It didn't want prayer or blood or offerings. It wanted erosion. It wanted memory, identity. It wanted to hollow me out and fill me with itself. And it was working. Every night I lit the candles. Every night I read the words. Even when they burned. Even when they bled. Because I had to understand it, or I wouldn't survive it. The basement was colder than it had ever been. Not just in temperature, but in presence. It felt like the very air had turned against me, heavier and thicker, like it didn't want to be breathed. My flashlight flickered as I stepped carefully down the rotting stairs, each wooden step groaning beneath my weight like it was warning me to turn back. But I couldn't. I had to see what Ethan was hiding down there. It smelled like wet soil and burnt hair, the kind of smell that crawls into your clothes and clings to your skin. I covered my mouth with my sleeve and kept moving, the light shaking in my hand. Then I saw it. The hole. It was no longer just a shallow pit like before. It had become a deep, spiraling tunnel, wide enough for a man to walk through. The walls of the tunnel weren't made of normal dirt anymore. They pulsed slightly, as if veins lay beneath the surface. Lines, symbols, were carved into the walls in that strange language I'd been trying to translate. The same one Ethan had been whispering in his sleep. My stomach turned. I wanted to scream. I wanted to run. But something about that hole, it called to me. Not with words. With memory. As if the thing beneath it had been part of me all along, waiting to be remembered. That's when I heard the voices. Faint at first. Like whispers slipping through cracks in the stone. Then louder. Clearer. Chanting. Low, rhythmic, ancient. I turned the flashlight toward the tunnel again, and that's when I saw the footprints. Ethan's boots, still wet with dirt, trailing deep into the darkness. I followed them. The tunnel sloped downward, curving gently like it knew where it was going without question. The air grew hotter the deeper I went. My flashlight dimmed, and I smacked it to keep it alive. Just as I was about to lose light entirely, I turned a corner and stopped. I had reached the chamber. It was enormous, far bigger than the space beneath the house should have allowed. The walls were made of black stone, covered in moving symbols, pulsing like they were alive. At the center stood a stone altar, and above it, something was buried in the ceiling. I didn't know what it was. Not fully. Only that it was massive, and I couldn't look directly at it. My eyes blurred whenever I tried, like it existed between thoughts. Ethan stood at the altar. His shirt was gone, and his chest was covered in cuts, symbols carved into his skin, blood tracing down his stomach. His eyes were shut. His mouth moved, but no sound came out. Then he opened his eyes, and they weren't his anymore. "James," he said, voice low and slow like molasses. "It's almost time." I stepped closer, shaking. "Ethan, what have you done?" He smiled. Not kindly. Not like the Ethan I loved, but like something was smiling through him. "You weren't supposed to see this part. But it's all right. It's better this way. It wants you anyway." The ground shook. A low rumble echoed through the stone, and dust fell from the ceiling. Suddenly, I felt something inside me move. It was like a memory, but not one of mine. Someone else's memory. A little girl hiding in the dirt. A priest whispering into a crack in the ground. A man tearing his face off in front of a mirror. All these pieces rushed into me. I stumbled backward and fell to my knees. "I won't let you," I gasped. "You already have," Ethan whispered, stepping down from the altar. "We're just digging up what's always been here." The chanting grew louder. I hadn't even seen them at first, but there they were, masked figures standing around the edges of the chamber, swaying, humming, worshipping. I looked at Ethan one last time before running. I didn't know where I was going. I only knew I had to get out. Had to breathe something that wasn't filled with that voice. But as I climbed, something deep inside me said the truth. I was already part of it, and it was waking up. The night was thick with silence. Not the kind of silence that brings peace. This one pressed against your chest like a heavy hand, like something watching from all directions but staying just out of sight. I stood at the edge of the basement stairs, holding the candle in one hand and the old scroll in the other, the one I had pieced together over weeks of sleepless nights. Ethan was already gone. He'd left hours ago, eyes blank, mouth whispering that awful language, the one I couldn't hear without feeling like my bones were vibrating. I'd followed the trail of dirt and blood he left behind. It led me deep into the hollow beneath our house, into the dark stomach of something far older than the home or the town above it. Each step down felt wrong. The air got thicker. My skin itched with something I couldn't see. The walls of the tunnel pulsed like they were breathing. Faint chanting echoed from the end. As I moved closer, the floor beneath my feet became damp and soft, like wet soil mixed with rot. Then I saw it. The chamber. It opened wide and deep beneath the earth. Twisting roots hung like black veins from the ceiling. At its center stood the altar. Not stone, not wood, something else. Something that shimmered like skin but didn't move like it. It pulsed, breathing slow and steady. They were all there. The cult. Hooded. Silent. Their faces masked by strange bone-like carvings. Leo stood near the altar, shirtless, his pale skin covered in symbols written in blood. And Ethan, my Ethan, knelt at the edge of the slab, eyes closed, arms raised, mumbling the tongue like it was his own. He thinks he can offer himself, Leo said, turning toward me. His smile was wide and wet, like something stretched too far. But the god does not want him. My candle flickered violently. The scroll in my hand felt hot, like it had caught fire without flames. The god chose you, James, Leo whispered, because you break so beautifully. I took a step forward. My legs shook, but I didn't stop. Ethan turned to me then. His eyes glowed faintly, like candlelight trapped in a jar. I did this for us, he said. You'll understand soon. Before I could reply, the ground cracked beneath the altar. A sound poured out from the deep, a voice with no direction, no gender, no mercy. It was like thousands of voices whispering behind walls. I dropped the candle. Darkness swallowed everything. But the altar glowed now, bright and red, and the cult chanted louder. Etzalim, Hadaroth, Omati Kaelyan. The earth beneath my feet trembled. I could feel the god rising. Leo stepped closer. Say the words, James. Let it in. You were always the door. I stared at Ethan. At the man I loved, now unrecognizable. I remembered the nights we held each other in the dark, how he made me laugh, how he promised this house would be a new beginning. Now it was the end. I raised the scroll. My hands were shaking, but I read aloud, not the way it was written, but in reverse. Indashtimaru, Hushtalem. The chamber screamed. Not the cult. Not the god. The chamber itself. Like I was ripping flesh from the inside. Leo lunged at me, but the moment my voice hit the final line, the altar exploded with a light so bright it was colorless. The roots above twisted and pulled inward. Shadows poured from the floor like smoke with teeth. Leo shrieked, his voice cracking like dry wood, and the shadows devoured him. Ethan collapsed. The god roared, an endless sound like the sky falling into the ocean. I kept chanting in reverse, again and again, until my throat bled. Then silence. True silence. Everything stopped. The chamber dimmed. The earth held still. I fell to my knees, sobbing, clutching the ruined scroll. My body felt hollow, like something had been taken out and replaced with cold air. Ethan was breathing. Barely. The cultists were gone. Dust. Ash. Nothing more. But the altar still pulsed. And beneath the stone, I swore I heard it whisper. I'm not done. I closed my eyes and waited for the dark to speak again. I don't remember walking into the basement. My feet moved on their own, drawn by the humming, low and endless, like 1,000 mouths groaning through stone. The door had vanished. In its place was a tunnel of damp earth, pulsing like the inside of a throat. I could hear Ethan's voice ahead, calm and soft, whispering words I didn't recognize but somehow understood. Words that felt like knives against the inside of my skull. I followed the tunnel. The walls seemed to breathe, expanding and tightening, as if I were walking deeper into something alive. My breath came in shallow gasps. Every few feet, candles flickered from the soil, their flames blue, not orange. They hissed as I passed. Then the cavern opened. It wasn't a basement anymore. It was a cathedral carved out of raw earth. A pit in the middle glowed with a sickly red light, as if magma burned just beneath. Around it stood the cult, hooded, silent, their heads bowed. And at the very center, on a raised slab of dark stone, Ethan stood barefoot, his arms raised. Leo was beside him, robed in something that looked like stitched skin. He held an old book in one hand, the same one I'd tried to burn weeks ago. It hadn't worked. Nothing ever works here. He saw me. Welcome, James, Leo said, smiling like we were old friends. You're just in time. The god is waking. Ethan turned toward me. His eyes were gone, 2 dark holes leaking shadow down his cheeks. It's okay, he whispered. You don't have to fight anymore. Just let go. I stepped forward, feeling the weight of the air press against my chest. My knees shook. The pit behind Ethan pulsed. Something beneath it shifted, a sound like stone grinding against bone. I felt it in my teeth. Why me? I asked, voice dry. Why not Ethan? Leo tilted his head. Ethan was the key, not the lock. He opened the way. But you, James, you're hollow in just the right places. Regret, guilt, fear, it makes you a vessel that won't break. The god's voice rose. Not a sound, exactly, more like a memory shoved into my brain. I remembered drowning, though I never had. I remembered being buried alive. I remembered screaming without sound. My nose bled. My vision blurred. I dropped to my knees. Ethan tried to speak again, but the ground cracked beneath him. A long, gnarled hand reached up, made of roots and ash and something worse. It touched his chest, and he screamed, not in pain but in terror. It didn't want him. It wanted me. I scrambled back. My hand brushed my jacket pocket. The paper, the one from the attic, the page with the chant. My last hope. The one the old woman told me never to read forward. She said, "It's not a spell. It's a memory. Say it wrong and it remembers you." I didn't say it forward. I read it backward. The words tasted like ash and glass. The cult screamed. The pit thrashed. The ground split open, swallowing the slab Ethan stood on. Leo shouted something in that ancient tongue, but the god didn't listen to him anymore. It was listening to me. It hated what I was saying. The cavern began to collapse. Hooded figures fell into the pit, their robes catching fire in midair. Ethan reached for me, his face finally his own again. I grabbed his hand and pulled. Leo's last scream echoed as the god took him. The book burned in his hands, then turned to dust. We ran. The tunnel closed behind us, groaning like a beast denied a meal. I didn't stop until we burst into the kitchen, gasping, shaking, bleeding. I slammed the door shut, though I knew doors didn't matter now. Not really. The humming had stopped. The silence was louder. Ethan sat against the wall, staring at his hands like they were someone else's. His voice was broken when he finally spoke. Did we win? I didn't answer, because beneath the floorboards, I heard breathing again. Slower, deeper, and I knew this wasn't over. The house is quiet now. The kind of quiet that hums behind your ears. The kind that doesn't feel like peace, it feels like something waiting. I haven't left the house in 9 days. Ethan doesn't speak. He just stares out the window near the fireplace, wrapped in that old wool blanket. He doesn't ask what happened that night, and I don't tell him. Maybe he remembers. Maybe he doesn't want to. His eyes still move like he's watching something no one else can see. Sometimes I catch him mouthing words in silence, but when I listen closer, it's not English. It's not any language I've ever heard. It's the hollow tongue. But it's me the house whispers to now. At night, I hear it again. The voice. Low, dry like wind scraping across stone. It speaks from the corners of rooms, from behind mirrors, from beneath the wooden planks of the basement that I tried to seal. It says my name. It hums those cursed verses I chanted backward during the ritual. The ones I hoped would bury it forever. I think it likes me. Every morning, I find dirt beneath my fingernails. I don't remember digging. Today, I found a note tucked between pages of an old photo album. I don't remember writing it, but the handwriting was mine. It read, "You are not a vessel. You are a doorway." I laughed at first. It sounded like something Leo would have said. But Leo's gone now. Whatever took him, whatever twisted his face into that final scream, didn't leave anything behind. No blood. No body. Just his mask, half buried in the dirt of the cavern when I came back alone. The cracks in the basement walls have started to heal on their own. That shouldn't be possible. The stone has smoothed over, but there are faint shapes beneath the surface. Faces, maybe. I see them move when I blink. I don't go down there anymore. At least, I don't remember going. Sometimes Ethan mumbles in his sleep. He calls out names, none I recognize. Once he called mine. But not James. He said it like it was something older, deeper buried. I didn't wake him. I don't sleep much anyway. The worst part? I think I understand the language now. Not just read it, feel it. Like it grew roots in my brain. I tried to write about everything in my journal, to hold on to something real. But I flipped through it last night, and half the pages aren't in English anymore. I don't remember changing them. The buried voice, it didn't die. It just went quiet, like it's waiting for something. Like me. I can still smell the earth. The rich, rotten scent of something ancient, something hungry. The same smell from that night when the ground opened like a mouth. When Leo called it a god. When Ethan's eyes rolled back and mine were forced open. I know now it doesn't want worship. It wants memory. The things we hide. The pieces we forget. The pain we bury so deep we pretend it's not there. That's what it feeds on. And I gave it everything. Now, I hear it even in the silence. in the hum of the fridge, in the creak of the old pipes, in the wind that slides beneath the door when the moon's just right. It speaks to me, and sometimes I answer. The basement door creaks open behind me. I didn't touch it. I guess I'll go see what it wants. It's quiet now, but I still dream in its language.